Scythians, the phantom horsemen. Close your eyes for a moment. You're standing in the middle of a vast steppe, stretching from Eastern Europe all the way to Siberia. The wind howls. Tall grass bends like waves on an endless ocean. And then, from far away, you hear it. The thunder of hooves, not tanks, not Roman legions marching in perfect formation, but riders, long-haired warriors who seem fused to their saddles, in their hands, short bows, in their eyes, a piercing fire. They move so fast, it feels like even the wind has to step aside. These are the Scythians, the ghosts of the steppe. A people who once made both Greece and Rome shiver in fear, and secretly, in awe. But here's the mystery. Who were they? Where did they come from? And why did they vanish, leaving behind no cities, no marble monuments, no grand empire, just silent burial mounds scattered under dirt and ice? Archaeologists once uncovered the tomb of a Scythian chieftain, and guess what? He was buried with more than 20 horses, as if his personal cavalry would carry him straight into the afterlife. Now be honest, if it were you, would you really want to rest in peace next to an entire stable? If you flip open the pages of Herodotus, the father of history, though many joke he's also the father of tall tales, you'll find Scythians described as undefeated horse, warriors, living on horseback, shooting arrows with deadly precision, and supposedly indulging in a gruesome hobby, drinking the blood of their enemies. Did Herodotus exaggerate to keep the crowd in Athens awake? Probably. But one thing's certain, the very name Scythian made more than a few Roman generals squirm. The problem is, they didn't leave much behind. The Greeks gave us temples. The Romans, Colosseums. The Scythians, they pitched leather tents and then moved on. Cities may have vanished, but the graves remained. And in the permafrost of Siberia, archaeologists have found Scythian mummies preserved so perfectly you can still see their tattoos. Elaborate designs, dragons, stags, tigers. If you think tattoos are a millennial fad, think again. The Scythians were rocking full-body ink 2,500 years ago. On this journey, we'll trace 5 paths, their mysterious origins, their life on the steppe, the art of war that made them a nightmare for the ancient world, their strange and spectacular funeral rites, and finally, the puzzle of their disappearance and the legacy that still lingers today. Sometimes you'll laugh, because Scythian feasts sound a lot like frat parties after a football game. Sometimes you'll shiver, because their rituals make Game of Thrones look tame. And sometimes you'll be surprised, because the people once branded as barbarians might just be distant ancestors of many modern Eurasian nations. This isn't a dry history lecture. It's an adventure through windswept grasslands, bloody battlefields, and icy tombs. And if you're ready to ride along, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. Not because YouTube needs another click, but because you deserve to hear the strangest, wildest, most fascinating stories history has to offer. So tighten the reins, ready your bow, and join me as we begin the hunt for the ghosts of the steppe, the Scythians. Close your eyes for a second. Picture the endless Eurasian steppe stretching out before you. Golden grass bending in the wind, a sky so bright it almost hurts your eyes. And then, from far away, you hear it. The pounding of hooves. Not a few lazy camels plodding along, but an entire wave of horsemen, bows raised, hair whipping in the cold air. And no, this isn't Hollywood. This is real. These are the Scythians, the nomadic riders who made both Greece and Rome shiver in fear and marvel in awe. Herodotus, the Greek historian who loved a good story almost as much as facts, once called them the undefeated horsemen. And for once, he wasn't exaggerating. But here's the mystery. Who were they? Where did they come from? And why did these so-called borderless phantoms nearly vanish from history, leaving behind no shining cities, no marble temples, just silent graves under earth and ice. Archaeology gives us a few spine-tingling clues. In one Scythian burial mound, a kurgan, a chieftain, was found buried with 20 horses. 20, as if his personal cavalry would ride with him straight into the afterlife. Be honest, if it were you, would you really want to rest in peace next to an entire stable? Ask the Greeks or Romans, and you'll hear the same mixed story: admiration and fear. Admiration for their skill on horseback, their deadly archery, their freedom on the open plains. Fear because they called them barbarians, blood drinkers, people without cities or walls. The Romans went further, seeing the Scythians as a nightmare on horseback, impossible to conquer or absorb. Strabo, the Roman geographer, described them with awe and dread, uncertain if he was writing about men or ghosts riding out of the mist. And here's the irony. The Greeks and Romans, so proud of their marble temples, their philosophies, their theaters, often trembled before warriors in leather jackets, living in tents, moving with their herds. One side had the Parthenon, the other, leather pants built for riding, and somehow, history admitted it. Those leather pants could be just as terrifying as marble columns. So let me ask you directly. If you were a Greek soldier facing the Scythians out on the open steppe, would you stand and fight? Or would you turn your heels and run? The real question remains, were the Scythians just barbarian nomads? Or were they pioneers, foundations of the great nomadic traditions that would dominate Eurasia for centuries to come? That's the story we're about to chase, over 5 chapters. We'll follow their mysterious origins, their nomadic way of life, the art of war that turned them into legends, their strange and chilling funerary rites, and finally, the puzzle of their disappearance. And I promise, this isn't a dry lecture that'll put you to sleep. This is a ride through howling winds, bloody battlefields, and frozen tombs. You'll meet tattooed mummies with dragons etched into their skin, warrior women who may have inspired the Amazons, and military tactics so sharp that even modern generals nod in respect. So, hit subscribe, turn on the bell. Not for YouTube's sake, but so you don't miss this journey. Because once you've taken it, you'll never look at a horse the same way again. Now, tighten the reins. Close your eyes for a second. Picture yourself standing on a wild hillside. The wind cuts through tall grass, hissing. And in front of you, the steppe, stretching out to infinity. No city walls, no marble columns like Athens, no arenas like Rome. Just clusters of round leather tents, smoke from morning fires mixing with the smell of dry grass. This is the city of the Scythians, not fixed, not eternal, but alive. Morning breaks, horses neigh, children run barefoot, tugging on reins, like they're toys. Adults stoke fires, sharpen spears, and get ready for another day on the move. Their homes are yurts, portable tents of felt and wood. You can raise one in a few hours and tear it down in minutes. No permanent address. Wherever there's grass for horses and water for herds, there's the capital. In Scythian life, family and clan came first. A tribe was a web of blood ties and survival pacts. On the steppe, no one lived alone. You needed someone to herd your horses, someone to guard your sleep, and someone to ride beside you when Persian cavalry stormed in at midnight. That balance of tight bonds and flexible alliances, that was their survival code, and survival meant food. Forget the cliché of eating grass and air. Their menu was hearty: roasted meat, horse milk, and kumis. Kumis was their cocktail of choice, fermented mare's milk. If wine was Greece's pride, kumis was the shot glass of the steppe. The taste? Sour, creamy, with a kick. Perfect for a freezing night, but, let's be honest, not exactly Starbucks material. Herodotus swore the Scythians guarded the recipe so fiercely that if you peeked at the process, you might not live to tell the tale. Then there were the darker rumors, that they ate their enemies, that they skinned the fallen for cloaks. Creepy, right? But archaeology tells another story. Bones and hearths point to a diet of livestock and traded grains. So, if someone asks, did Scythians eat people? The safest answer is no, unless it's a Netflix script. Now, fashion. Do you know who likely invented pants? Not Gucci, not Levi's, the Scythians. While Greeks strutted around in tunics, basically linen dresses, the Scythians wore leather pants, tight, practical, perfect for riding. Imagine galloping 20 miles in a cotton skirt. Not only awkward, but dangerous. Their outfit, leather jacket, leather pants, tall boots, functional, cool, and contagious. Later European cavalry picked it up, but their true art? Ink on skin. The frozen tombs of Pazyryk in Siberia still show intricate tattoos after 2,000 years. On arms, on chests, on backs, stags, tigers, griffins, mythic beasts. Not fashion statements, but sacred symbols, protective spirits for the afterlife. A Scythian warrior might leave no palace behind, but his own body was a living canvas of myth and memory. And now, the twist. The women. You've heard of Amazons, right? The terrifying warrior women of Greek legend. Many scholars trace that myth straight back to Scythian women. Archaeologists have found female skeletons buried with bows, spears, even sacrificed horses. Some bones carry battle wounds. They weren't mascots, they were fighters. Now imagine you're a Greek hoplite, used to women being hidden indoors, and suddenly a woman on horseback charges you with an arrow notched. No wonder myths were born. So no, the Scythian world wasn't poor or simple. It was layered, fierce, rich in symbols. Each yurt was a living cell of the tribe. Each fire pit, a universe of stories and survival. They built no stone cities, but they etched culture into skin, rituals, and the nightmares of their enemies. Herodotus and Strabo captured them with words balanced on the edge of awe and fear. Admired for their skill and freedom, feared for their uncontrollable way of life. That's the Scythians. Not an empire with marble capitals, but the ghost of the steppe, both alluring and terrifying. Picture this. You're standing on a wild, grassy hill. The wind tears through the tall blades, and the ground itself seems to tremble under pounding hooves. If there's one symbol that defines the Scythians, it's the horse. For them, horses weren't just transportation. They were food, they were weapons, they were wealth, and honestly, almost part of the soul. The Greeks once described the Scythians as people born on horseback, and that wasn't a metaphor, it was reality. A Scythian boy was put on a horse almost before he could walk. Archaeologists have uncovered Scythian kurgans, massive burial mounds, where dozens of horses were buried alongside a single chieftain. Each horse decorated with golden bridles, ornate saddles, even masks carved with intricate patterns. It wasn't just about prestige. It was about making sure that in the afterlife, the chief still had his cavalry. Their horses weren't tall and glamorous like Greek war horses. They were small, tough, tireless. Not much to look at, but they could run for miles without food or water. And those humble little steeds turned the Scythians into nightmares for the so-called civilized empires. And when we talk about Scythian horses, we have to talk about their weapon of legend, the short bow. Don't confuse it with the massive longbows you've seen in medieval Europe. This was a composite bow made from wood, horn, sinew, all pressed together with natural glue. The result? Small, portable, but with terrifying range and power. Excavations in the frozen tombs of Pazyryk show Scythian warriors always carried their bow and a quiver loaded with iron-tipped arrows, ready to go. Their horseback archery skills? Almost mythic. Imagine galloping full speed, reins in one hand, twisting around to fire arrows backwards at the enemy chasing you. The Greeks later called it the Parthian shot. but Scythians mastered it centuries earlier. This gave them a perfect hit-and-run strategy. Charge in, rain down arrows, vanish, before the enemy can react. Infantry armies, used to tidy battle lines, went insane trying to fight this. You stand there with your spear, waiting for combat, and instead hundreds of horsemen swarm in, arrows flying like rain, then wheel away. You chase them, and boom! They spin around and shoot again. It was psychological warfare, too. Every arrow wasn't just a weapon, it was an insult. To see just how dangerous they were, let's look at their clashes with empires. Take Persia. 5th century BC. Darius the Great, conqueror of Babylon, Egypt, even challenger of Greece, decides he'll tame the Scythians. He marches a massive army across the Danube into the steppe. And what happens? The Scythians vanish. No epic showdown, no blood-soaked battlefield. Instead, scorched earth. Wells destroyed, grasslands burned, supply lines harassed. The Persians chase shadows deeper and deeper into the endless plain. Morale collapses, food runs out, and Darius, lord of the world, is forced to retreat, defeated not by walls or cities, but by a ghost army on horseback. And the Greeks? Their colonies along the Black Sea, places like Olbia and Chersonesus, were in constant push and pull with the Scythians. Sometimes they traded grain and slaves for wine and pottery. Other times, when the Scythians got angry, whole towns were flattened in days. Strabo, the Roman geographer, summed it up. They have no fortresses, no fields, but they have what no one can resist, the legs of their horses and the flight of their arrows. There's even the tragic story of King Siles, a Scythian ruler who loved Greek culture a little too much. He put on Greek robes, joined Greek rituals, drank Greek wine. His people saw this and executed him. To them, betrayal of the steppe meant death. You could trade with Greeks, you could drink with them, but abandon the horse and bow for a toga. Forget it, you'd die for it. Their style of warfare, honestly, was ahead of its time. Avoid the enemy's strengths, exploit mobility, use the battlefield itself as a weapon. Today, we'd call it asymmetric warfare, the weak outmaneuvering. The strong sound familiar? From Genghis Khan's Mongols to 20th century guerrilla fighters, it's the same playbook, first perfected by the Scythians. But in the eyes of their enemies, who were they really? Herodotus paints them as invincible warriors, living on horseback, eating meat, drinking milk, never bowing to anyone. Yet the same sources accuse them of drinking enemy blood, flaying their foes for cloaks. Truth or propaganda? Hard to say. Probably both. The Greeks and Romans had a habit of demonizing their enemies, make them look monstrous, and it's easier to justify war. And here's the irony. While Greeks sneered and called them barbarians, they also borrowed from them. On Greek pottery, you'll see archers wearing trousers, directly inspired by Scythian fashion. The barbarian pants, mocked by Athens, eventually spread westward, until even Roman cavalry adopted them. What was once uncivilized became the standard. It's like mocking rap as noise. Then 10 years later, it's all over your Spotify playlist. So by the end of this chapter, the picture is clear. The Scythians didn't need stone cities. They didn't need marble walls. They had horses, bows, the steppe itself, and a way of war so refined it humiliated empires. They were and remain the ghosts without borders. Here one moment, gone the next, and always haunting those who dared to fight them. Imagine standing before a massive earthen mound rising out of the Ukrainian steppe. At first glance, it looks like just another grassy hill. But the shape is too deliberate, too intentional. The locals call it a kurgan, a Scythian burial mound. Don't think of it as a simple grave. Each kurgan was like a pyramid of the steppe, where power, religion, and the dream of immortality all came together. When archaeologists dig into them, they don't just find bones, they uncover entire worlds, In Ukraine, some kurgans have yielded so much gold that ancient Greek writers once quipped, "The Scythians wear gold the way other men wear clothes." Imagine it, golden crowns shaped like deer, goblets etched with drunken banquets, daggers with hilts carved into mythical beasts. For the Scythian elite, gold wasn't just wealth, it was a passport, proof of power to flaunt in the afterlife. Travel farther east into Siberia's Altai Mountains, and you reach one of the most breathtaking discoveries of the 20th century, the Pazyryk tombs, especially Kurgan number 5. When the permafrost was cracked open, archaeologists found a nobleman buried with his wooden chariot, saddles, and even woven textiles. Among them, the Pazyryk carpet, the world's oldest surviving wool carpet, over 2,400 years old. Its patterns are still vivid, almost brand new. It stunned scholars. How could nomads, people who lived on horseback, create art so intricate, so refined? And then there were the ice mummies, bodies buried with pine resin to preserve them, wrapped in furs. Against the eternal cold, when the frost sealed them, they froze in time. One noblewoman, known today as the Princess of Ukok, was found tattooed from shoulder to wrist. Stags with curling antlers, roaring tigers, birds of prey, all inked across her skin. These weren't decorative doodles. They were spiritual markers, a kind of supernatural passport that told the gods who she was in the afterlife. Herodotus, the Greek historian, described Scythian funerals as massive rituals. When a king or chief died, his embalmed body was paraded from tribe to tribe. For 40 days, the people mourned. At the end, he was buried in a kurgan with his wives, his servants, and, most striking of all, his horses. Not just one or two, sometimes hundreds. They were slaughtered, mounted on wooden posts, saddled and bridled as if still alive, waiting to carry their master into the eternal steppe. It's both epic and brutal. And it wasn't unique to the Scythians. The Huns, centuries later, killed horses for their chiefs. The Mongols shrouded Genghis Khan's grave in secrecy, along with his herd. Among nomadic peoples, a funeral wasn't just a goodbye. It was a political statement. The leader never truly died. He simply rode on with his immortal cavalry. But reading Herodotus also delivers a chill. He claims Scythians drank the blood of their first enemy killed in battle, that they scalped their foes and stitched the skins into cloaks. It sounds like a horror headline, doesn't it? But remember, Herodotus was Greek, and to Greeks, the Scythians were both trade partners and a looming threat. Painting them as bloodthirsty monsters served a purpose. It reassured Greek audiences that they were civilized, while the steppe dwellers were beasts. Modern archaeology suggests there's some truth to trophy-taking, but the human skin cloaks, likely exaggeration. Think of it as one of the earliest smear campaigns in history. Exaggerations aside, one truth stands out. For the Scythians, death wasn't an ending. It was a doorway. A kurgan wasn't a tomb, it was a new home. Gold was dowry, horses were transportation, tattoos were passports. The afterlife wasn't emptiness. It was another steppe, boundless and eternal, where warriors rode, hunted, and feasted with their ancestors. And that's why walking into a Scythian tomb today still makes your skin prickle. You don't just see remnants of the dead, you feel their preparations to live forever. Picture this, the last twilight over the steppe. The Scythian campfires flicker, yurts dot the horizon, but out at the edge of the grasslands, you hear it. Strange hoofbeats, not Scythian, not familiar. Something new is coming. By the 3rd century, BCE, the shadows of a people who once terrified Greece and Persia were starting to fade. Not because they vanished overnight, but because the steppe has its own law. No ruler lasts forever. Today, you ride with bow in hand. Tomorrow, someone else takes your place. The Sarmatians, distant cousins of the Scythians, pushed them west, away from the Black Sea. Then came the Huns, lightning-fast horsemen of Asian descent who swept aside whatever remained. Some Scythians were absorbed, others scattered into neighboring tribes. Trade routes shifted, flowing through Persia or across the seas, bypassing the old Scythian stations. And for nomads, losing horses and trade was like losing breath itself. What was left? The mounds, the kurgans, silent witnesses that they had ever lived. And yet, they didn't disappear completely. Look at modern DNA maps. Slavs, Turkic peoples, even some Iranians carry traces of Scythian blood. Their language, an ancient branch of Iranian, left behind words and customs embedded in neighboring cultures. You may not meet a Scythian, a warrior, riding across the steppe today, but you'll see them in the myth of the Amazons, in the cavalry styles of medieval Russia, in the mounted archery of the Huns and the Mongols. In other words, the Scythians dissolved into humanity's bloodstream, leaving a taste that lingers, even if their name doesn't. And their art, still dazzling. Gold artifacts gleam in Kiev, in St. Petersburg, in the Hermitage Museum. Deer leaping. Across golden plaques, drinking cups etched with hunts, daggers crowned with snarling panthers. Archaeologists looked at them and gasped. These weren't barbarians. These were master goldsmiths. The irony is delicious. Rome may have sneered at their savagery, but the treasures prove the Scythians had a sense of beauty as refined as any so-called civilized empire. In Greek and Roman memory, the Scythians were a paradox. On one hand, they symbolized freedom. No walls, no kings, no polis, just horse, bow, and endless fields. For city dwellers, that wild liberty was both terrifying and enviable. On the other hand, to calm their own nerves, Greeks painted them as monsters. Herodotus told tales of blood drinking. Strabo wrote about their lack of urban culture. It was psychological theater, admiration tangled with contempt, so Athens and Rome could reassure themselves they were civilized. But here's the final question. Did the Scythians really vanish, or did they simply change shape? Modern genetics says they didn't die out at all. They lived on, as Sarmatians, as pieces of the Slavs, as shards of the Huns, as whispers in the steppe tribes of Iran. The Scythians became a genetic ghost, unseen, but still riding in the veins of millions. And maybe that's the lesson. Disappearance doesn't always mean defeat. Sometimes dissolving into others is survival on a scale that outlasts empires. Rome collapsed. Athens crumbled into ruins. But the Scythians, their spirit still thunders in DNA, in art, in memory. Their death was never the snuffing of a flame. It was the scattering of sparks, ash carried by the wind, glowing wherever it landed. So the next time the wind sweeps across the grasslands of Ukraine or Kazakhstan, listen closely. If you hear a faint rhythm, like ghostly hoofbeats, you'll know. The Scythians never truly left. Imagine this. After a long ride across the steppe, we finally come to the end of the trail. The story of the Scythians was never about castles or marble temples. They didn't leave behind colosseums or stone libraries. What they built was an empire without walls, where horses were the soul, bows were the breath, and the endless grasslands were home. To the Greeks, they were fear itself. To the Romans, they were savages on horseback. But no one denied it. The Scythians were once a nightmare on hooves, striking like lightning, raining arrows like storms, then vanishing before you could catch your breath. And here's the twist. Even without monuments, they left marks the world. Couldn't erase. Their gold, etched with leaping stags and mythical beasts, still dazzles in today's museums. Their mounted archery lived on, copied by Huns, Mongols, and even medieval knights. The Scythians proved a paradox. You don't need stone walls to be an empire. Sometimes, all it takes is freedom, speed, and a will strong enough to echo through centuries. But in the end, they didn't vanish. They melted into the DNA of Slavs, into the culture of Turkic peoples, into the art of ancient Iranians. They ceased to exist as a single name, but became a ghost spread everywhere. And maybe that's the quietest kind of immortality a people can claim. So if one day you stand on the windswept plains of Kazakhstan, close your eyes. In the whistle of the grass, you just might hear the faint rhythm of phantom hoofbeats, the Scythians still riding, still alive in human memory. And remember, this is only one tale among countless forgotten civilizations. If you don't want history to keep gathering dust on the shelf, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Not for YouTube's sake, but because you deserve more journeys like this, where the past stops being boring and becomes strange, haunting, unforgettable. I'm Professor. This is Boring Becomes Fun. I'll see you on the next ride, where we'll uncover another civilization few ever talk about, but once you hear their story, you'll never forget. It's dawn in Cambodia. The first rays of sunlight spill across the massive stone towers of Angkor Wat. Their shadows stretch over the reflecting pool in front, the surface rippling slightly in the breeze, an image so cinematic it feels unreal. You've probably seen it before, in photos, documentaries, maybe even in a video game. But what most people don't think about is the story behind it, the epic tale of a civilization that once ranked among the greatest the world has ever seen. Who built Angkor Wat? A temple so vast it's been called the Versailles of Asia, except carved out of stone and mythology? Why, in the middle of a Southeast Asian jungle, did a colossal city rise up, with a population that may have reached 1 million, dwarfing almost every European city of the same era? And the biggest question of all, why did it all disappear? Why did an empire that once commanded armies, sculpted gods from stone, and controlled water like clockwork, end up swallowed by strangler figs and creeping jungle, as if nature had been patiently waiting to reclaim what humans borrowed? On this journey, we're not just circling moss-covered ruins. We're rewinding time. We'll meet Khmer kings with godlike power, visionary architects, and countless farmers whose sweat under the tropical sun powered a mega city in the forest. We'll uncover how Angkor worked like a giant hydraulic machine, why its walls carry carvings of both Hindu epics and Buddhist teachings, and how such a dazzling civilization finally unraveled. This adventure takes us through 5 chapters. The rise of the Khmer Empire in the jungle, the immortal temples like Angkor Wat, Bayon, and Ta Prohm, daily life in Angkor, what people ate, wore, and believed, the shadows of decline and collapse, and finally, the legacy Angkor left behind, echoing all the way to today. And if you've ever thought Southeast Asian history was just a footnote next to China, India, or Rome, Angkor will make you think again. This is where stone speaks and the jungle never forgets. So come with me. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, not for YouTube's sake, but so you don't miss the ride. Because trust me, when history shifts from boring to fun, it'll surprise you in ways you never saw coming. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture yourself standing in the jungles of Southeast Asia, sometime in the 9th century. But what you see is not ruins covered in moss, not crumbling towers swallowed by roots. What you see is a living city. The sound of drums and gongs echo through the air, blending with the rush of water flowing through canals. The Mekong bends and twists nearby, monsoon rains pour down onto endless rice fields, and from this raw landscape, the Khmer people built one of the mightiest and strangest empires in history. When we say Khmer Empire, don't picture just a king with one palace and a capital city. No, this was a massive network of cities, canals, reservoirs, temples, and palaces stretching over thousands of square miles. Imagine a medieval megacity. No Wi-Fi, sure, but definitely a lot more crocodiles. And at the center of it all, one man, Jayavarman II. If Hollywood cast him in a series, the title would probably be Game of Thrones, Jungle Edition. In the year 802, he performed a ritual called Devaraja. Sounds like a cocktail, right? but it was deadly serious, a ceremony that declared him a god-king. From that moment, he wasn't just the political ruler. He was the earthly embodiment of the divine. In today's terms, he was the president, the pope, and the CEO of Angkor Incorporated, all rolled into one. This wasn't random. For centuries, Southeast Asia had absorbed influences from India, writing systems, mythology, and especially religion. That's why early Khmer kings built their empire around Hinduism, carving the gods Shiva and Vishnu into stone walls. But the Khmer didn't just copy-paste. They remixed it, bent it, reshaped it into something uniquely their own. Now, zoom out on the map. Angkor, the capital, wasn't just one temple like Angkor Wat. It was an urban sprawl larger than 1,000 square kilometers. For context, medieval London covered about 3, Paris about 4, Angkor 1,000. It was the New York City of the medieval world. And here's the twist. We only discovered the true scale recently, thanks to LiDAR, a high-tech laser scanning system that archaeologists shot from helicopters. The beams cut through the jungle canopy, revealing an entire city grid, roads, neighborhoods, canals, all hidden for centuries under the trees. Honestly, even Indiana Jones would have dropped his hat in awe. So how did Angkor thrive in this wet, steamy jungle? The answer: water. The Khmer engineered massive reservoirs, called baray, stretching for miles along with thousands of canals. They trapped monsoon rains and rationed them out in the dry season. It was essentially an industrial-scale irrigation system, a Google Maps for water, keeping the empire fed with endless rice. And they knew one thing better than anyone. Without rice, there is no god-king. The most astonishing part? The entire city ran smoothly, without cars, without concrete, without electricity. Just stone, wood, and water, arranged with breathtaking ingenuity. So when you look at Angkor Wat today, its lotus-shaped towers rising like stone flowers, don't think of it as a single temple lost in the jungle. It was once the beating heart of a megacity, the core of an empire. Proof that humans can build wonders even while battling mosquitoes, snakes, and 90% humidity. Do you see it now? Angkor wasn't just an abandoned temple for Instagram photos. It was a radiant megacity long before the word even existed, and this is only the beginning. In the next chapters, we'll step inside those stone walls, where myth, politics, and everyday life collide to tell the strange, breathtaking story of an empire that rose, flourished, and then vanished, like a ghost swallowed by the jungle. Picture this. You're crossing the long stone causeway into Angkor Wat just before dawn. The moat is perfectly still, reflecting the towering lotus-shaped spires, and then sunrise. Suddenly, the entire temple ignites like a torch made of stone. Every visitor stops in awe. But here's the thing, most people only see a postcard view. They miss the deeper story carved into every block of sandstone. Because Angkor Wat isn't just the largest religious monument in the world, it's a stone manifesto. Built in the early 12th century by King Suryavarman II, it was meant to be more than a temple to Vishnu. It was a miniature cosmos, a map of Hindu cosmology etched onto Cambodian soil. The central towers represent Mount Meru, the mythical home of the gods. The surrounding moats symbolize the cosmic ocean, and every hallway, stairway, and courtyard was calculated using sacred numbers. In other words, Angkor Wat was both a cathedral and a Google Maps of mythology. And don't think the Khmer were just blindly worshipping. They were engineers on another level. The sandstone came from Mount Kulin, almost 30 miles away. Imagine moving millions of stone blocks, each weighing tons. No trucks, no cranes, just elephants, wooden rafts, and sheer muscle. To haul them back, the Khmer literally carved new canals, turning rivers into highways. And when you see those blocks today, fitted together so tightly you couldn't slip a credit card between them, that's not magic. That's precision engineering. No cement, no steel, but still standing after 900 years. Walk into the galleries, and you'll see bas-reliefs stretching hundreds of feet. They tell stories straight from Hindu epics, like the churning of the ocean of milk. Gods and demons team up to stir the cosmic sea in search of Amrita, the nectar of immortality. If it feels like a Marvel crossover, that's because it basically was. But it wasn't just mythology, it was politics. The message was clear. Just as the gods brought order from chaos, King Suryavarman II kept order in the empire. And here's the twist. Angkor Wat started as a Hindu temple, but later became Buddhist. And there was no violent purge, no statues. Smashed. Buddha simply moved in and sat next to Vishnu. That quiet coexistence is a rare story of religious flexibility, especially compared to Europe's crusades at the exact same time. Of course, Angkor Wat wasn't a solo act. It was part of a whole architectural galaxy. Take Angkor Thom, the walled city covering 9 square kilometers. Walk through the south gate and you'll pass rows of massive statues pulling on a giant serpent, the Naga. Again, myth carved as propaganda. The king was the axis of the cosmos, holding chaos at bay. Then there's Bayon, famous for its giant smiling faces. Locals call it the Khmer smile, but this isn't your selfie grin. Scholars believe they're portraits of King Jayavarman VII, the empire's most powerful Buddhist ruler, which meant everywhere you turned, on towers, on walls, even in your dreams, the king was watching. Big Brother, Khmer style, carved in sandstone. And finally, Ta Prohm, the temple swallowed by strangler fig trees. Today, roots claw over crumbling towers like a slow-motion battle between jungle and stone. Hollywood used it as the backdrop for Tomb Raider. But trust me, the real thing makes CGI look cheap. So why did the Khmer build so many temples? Simple. Power and belief. Each one reminded people that the king was a living god. But they were also economic hubs. Around every temple you'd find villages, markets, workshops. A temple wasn't just for prayer. It was a medieval shopping mall, except instead of Starbucks, you got a statue of Vishnu. Today, most tourists snap a photo at sunrise and move on. But look closer, and you'll see. Every detail, every wall, every carving is a fragment of an lost superpower. Angkor Wat is a time capsule of ambition, belief, and arrogance. The Khmer saying to the world, we will outlast time itself. And here's the irony. The empire eventually collapsed, but the temples remain, mocking us from across the centuries. Angkor Wat seems to whisper, you disappeared. I'm still here. That's the first secret of the immortal temples. They aren't just beautiful ruins. They are stone biographies, telling us about greatness, faith, and the fragile pride of an empire that once ruled Southeast Asia. And in the next chapter, we'll step beyond the temples into the daily lives of Angkor's people, how they farmed, ate, celebrated, and believed. Because behind the god-kings and stone spires, there were millions of ordinary lives making it all possible. Imagine yourself standing in Angkor in the 12th century. Before you rise, not just stone towers reaching toward the sky, but an entire metropolis stretching across thousands of square miles. Every drumbeat, every ritual chant, every canal carrying water, all of it blending together into one grand symphony of life. Most people today think of Angkor as a cluster of temples, but back then, it was a living society. Farmers in the fields, merchants in the markets, craftsmen shaping stone, dancers moving like flowing water, officials recording decrees, and, above them all, a king who claimed to be not just human, but divine. So what was daily life really like here? Let's start with the foundation, rice and water. Rice was everything. And what made Angkor extraordinary wasn't simply the temples, but an irrigation system so advanced that modern engineers still marvel at it. The Khmer built massive reservoirs, called barae, some spanning miles, all connected by canals and underground drains. During the monsoon, they captured the floods. During the dry season, they released the water back into the fields. The result? Khmer farmers could harvest up to 3 crops of rice a year. Meanwhile, much of medieval Europe was still praying not to starve after a bad harvest. That's why Angkor could sustain more than 1 million people, while London at the time barely qualified as a town. Modern LiDAR scans from helicopters prove it. Under the jungle canopy still lies the imprint of canals, dikes, and reservoirs. Angkor wasn't just a city, it was a colossal rice machine. But Angkor didn't just feed itself. It grew wealthy from trade. Its location was a gift, right where the Indian Ocean meets the South China Sea. From India came spices, textiles, and Hindu philosophy. From China, porcelain, copper coins, and wide-eyed envoys scribbling down their observations. From Java and Srivijaya came great ships loaded with seafaring know-how and ceremonial dances. Angkor became a mandatory stop on medieval trade routes. Think of it as the Singapore of its time. And with the goods came ideas, languages, and art, weaving Khmer culture into a rich and colorful tapestry. At the center of it all stood the Khmer king. He wasn't just a political ruler, he was the Devaraja, the god king. That meant he was seen as the earthly incarnation of Shiva, Vishnu, or later the Buddha. To oppose him wasn't just rebellion, it was heresy against the cosmic order. The temples reflected that. Angkor Wat, Bayon, and others weren't only places of worship. They were monuments to authority. Carved into their walls, gods and demons wage epic battles side by side with scenes of Khmer kings commanding their armies. A temple here was a cathedral, a palace, and a political manifesto, all at once. And what about the ordinary people? They lived in wooden stilt houses with thatched roofs, villages alive with the sound of children, chickens, and neighbors calling across the fields. Men wore simple loincloths, women sarongs of cotton, often bearing a shoulder to cope with the heat. Meals were humble but steady: rice, fish from lakes and canals, and a pungent fermented fish paste, prahak, that archaeologists have even found traces of in ancient cooking pots. If you've ever wondered about Southeast Asia's obsession with fish sauce, its roots go all the way back to Angkor. Life wasn't all work. The Khmer loved festivals. On full moon nights, thousands gathered at temples with offerings of fruit and flowers, drums pounding, apsara dancers swaying in the torchlight. At Bayon, the reliefs show wrestlers grappling, monkeys performing tricks, and merchants selling from crowded stalls. Medieval Europe may have had its fairs, but Angkor threw its own version of Tomorrowland: music, dance, and moonlight woven together. And here's something many don't expect. Women played real roles. They weren't confined to palaces. Archaeology and ancient records show women as traders, landowners, and participants in rituals. In the carvings, you see female merchants at the market. In Chinese accounts, envoys describe Khmer women bargaining over goods. Half the population of Angkor wasn't hidden away. They were part of the engine that kept society moving. Put all of this together: ingenious irrigation, bustling trade, divine kingship, vibrant villages, and the rhythm of festivals, and Angkor stops being just a tangle of ruined temples swallowed by tree roots. It becomes something alive, a city with millions of heartbeats, a civilization that was both practical and mysterious. And maybe it was that blend, the combination of engineering, brilliance, and spiritual imagination, that made Angkor one of the most dazzling empires of the medieval world. Picture the sun setting over Angkor. The sky glows crimson, light sliding down the stone towers before fading into the jungle. It's breathtaking, yes, but behind that romantic postcard view lies a story that's anything but peaceful. The rise and fall of one of Southeast Asia's greatest empires. And the most fascinating part? Angkor didn't collapse because of a single cause, but from a chain reaction of disasters: nature, politics, war, and ironically, its own greatness. Let's start with water, the stuff we often take for granted. For Angkor, water was both miracle and curse. Its massive hydraulic system, Baray reservoirs, canals, underground drains, turned the city into a rice machine. But when the climate shifted, that same miracle became a burden. Sediment cores from Tonle Sap and Angkor's reservoirs reveal a grim story. In the 14th and 15th centuries, the region swung violently between long droughts and devastating floods. Imagine a delicate machine being switched on and off over and over until it broke. Canals cracked, mud clogged the waterways, harvests failed. A metropolis of hundreds of thousands couldn't feed itself anymore. And if you think a New York blackout is a nightmare, try picturing Angkor starving for years at a time. But nature was only the first blade. The second came from neighbors. While Angkor struggled with drought, to the west, the kingdom of Ayutthaya, what's now Thailand, was rising fast. In 1431, Ayutthaya's armies surrounded and sacked Angkor. Thai chronicles recorded a glorious victory, while Khmer records are fragmentary, laced with bitterness. Whether exaggerated or not, the fact is clear. Angkor never again returned to its former power. The royal court moved south, closer to Phnom Penh, where maritime trade was easier. Angkor, the once proud capital, was left to the mercy of the jungle. Then came the third blade, politics and religion. Khmer kings had long ruled as Devaraja, god kings. But as Theravada Buddhism spread from Sri Lanka, that model began to crumble. Instead of colossal stone temples that took decades to build, the new Buddhist ethos favored modest wooden monasteries, simple and impermanent. Spiritually, it was a revolution. Politically, it weakened the throne. The king was no longer a living god, just another patron of Buddhism among many monks. No more Angkor Wat or Bayon rising skyward, just smaller shrines that time and termites could easily erase. And lurking beneath it all was a hidden enemy, complexity itself. To maintain thousands of miles of canals, massive reservoirs, and monumental temples required an army of officials, laborers, and guards. But when the economy faltered, who paid their wages? When the canals broke, who had the manpower to repair them? In the 14th century, Europe was battling the Black Death. The Khmer, in their own way, faced what scholars call a hydraulic death. Slowly, the population thinned, families left, the jungle crept in, temples fell silent, embraced by roots. Yet this wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a slow fade. Parts of Angkor were still inhabited into the 16th and even 17th centuries. Temples were still used for rituals, but the heartbeat was gone. Think of a once bustling shopping mall, now with just a handful of shops still open. The lights hadn't gone out completely, but they had dimmed to a whisper. Ironically, Angkor's disappearance made it a legend. When the French arrived in the 19th century, they found moss-covered towers strangled by tree roots and called it the Machu Picchu of Asia. From a living city, Angkor had become the world's lost city, and in that mystery lay its allure. Without collapse, there would have been no Indiana Jones fantasies, no Tomb Raider running through vine-covered corridors. But let's be fair, Angkor didn't vanish entirely. The Khmer people endured, their language survived. Angkor Wat itself has been a living temple for over 900 years, never once abandoned. The empire may have fallen, but its soul seeped into the present. Today, Cambodia's national flag bears Angkor Wat, proof that while the city declined, the spirit of Angkor never died. In the end, the story of Angkor is both warning and inspiration. Greatness is fragile. When a civilization depends too heavily on intricate systems, a shift in nature or human ambition can unravel it all. But it's also a story of resilience. From Angkor's ruins, the Khmer people rebuilt, carried their culture forward, and turned the ruins into a symbol of pride. Imagine yourself standing in the courtyard of Angkor Wat on a modern morning. It's not the glory of the 12th century, nor the decline of the 15th. It's today. Around you, tourists from every corner of the world in t-shirts and sneakers crowd. Beneath the carvings of the Ramayana, selfie sticks raised high. Yet, even beneath the laughter and the clicking cameras, there's a strange feeling, as if the stones themselves are whispering memories that never really went to sleep. And that's what this final chapter is about, the legacy and memory of Angkor. Start with the most obvious, architecture. Angkor Wat isn't just another temple. It's the largest religious monument on Earth, covering more than 400 acres, bigger than the Vatican. But size alone isn't what makes it extraordinary. It's the cultural fusion carved into its walls. You see a Hindu temple dedicated to Vishnu, yet for centuries it has also been a Buddhist monastery. Even today, monks walk the corridors, incense burns, prayers echo. Angkor is not a dead ruin. It's a living sanctuary. And really, how many of the world's wonders can claim that? Then there's art. Khmer art isn't just a set of dusty statues locked in museums. It's a style that still defines Southeast Asia. The Apsara dancers carved into stone, bodies graceful, gestures eternal, are now the national symbol of Cambodia. Travelers in Phnom Penh or Siem Reap can watch modern Apsara dance performances, but their roots go straight back to the 12th century, etched into the walls of Bayon. Even in local restaurants, the murals often depict Apsaras, a reminder that Angkor's artistic memory still lives in everyday life. And what about language? The Khmer tongue, spoken by more than 16 million Cambodians today, is a direct descendant of the language of Angkor. Unlike Latin, which faded into textbooks, Khmer still thrives. It's the lullabies, the market cries, the festival chants. This means modern Cambodians don't just descend from Angkor. In a very real way, they are Angkor. Look no further than the national flag, Angkor Wat itself, front and center. How many nations put an ancient temple on their flag, unless that temple was part of their very identity? Of course, Angkor also lives in Western memory. In the 19th century, French explorer Henri Mouhot wrote about it as if he had stumbled upon a lost world, an Athens in the jungle. Europe became enchanted by the image of tree roots strangling towers, of temples swallowed by silence. They romanticized Angkor as Asia's Atlantis. But there's irony here. That very fascination helped justify Cambodia's colonization by France. The grandeur of Khmer heritage sparked pride, but also opened the door for foreign rule. Angkor's legacy isn't just beauty and myth, it's also a lesson. Today, when NASA studies climate change using satellite imagery, Angkor serves as a case study, a supercity that collapsed when its complex water system failed under cycles of drought and flood. For modern megacities, New York, Tokyo, Singapore, Angkor is a warning. No infrastructure is invincible, and nature always has the final say. There are darker scars, too. In the 20th century, Angkor was caught in war. Landmines littered its grounds, statues were shot, artifacts looted. Many Khmer sculptures now sit in European museums, their heads severed from their bodies, which means Angkor's story is not just one of pride, but also of cultural theft. And yet, despite being bombed, stolen, and abandoned, the towers still rise, the carvings still tell stories, as if the very stones refuse to forget. But most of all, Angkor lives in the memory of its people. For Cambodians, it's not just ancient ruins, it's proof of nationhood. They may have been conquered, ignored, even nearly erased, but as long as Angkor stands, they can say, "We were once an empire." You see it in festivals, in folklore, in everyday pride. Just as Greeks have Athens and Italians have Rome, Cambodians have Angkor. The difference is, Angkor isn't just in books. It's still right there, in their jungle. So what is Angkor's legacy? It's stone and temples, apsaras and language, flags and festivals. It's an environmental cautionary tale and a national badge of honor. But above all, it's humanity's shared memory that a massive city could rise in the rainforest, defy time, vanish, and yet never truly die. And if you ever find yourself at Angkor Wat at sunrise, when the golden light spills across the moat and the towers glow like fire, remember, you're not just watching a beautiful scene, you're standing inside a 1,000-year-old memory, one that roots can't strangle, rain can't erode, and time can't silence. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, about forgotten civilizations and dusty memories worth bringing back to life, you know what to do. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and join the journey where boring becomes fun. Picture this. We've just walked a full circle around Angkor, starting at sunrise when the towers of Angkor Wat glowed gold, wandering through shadowed corridors where bas-reliefs whisper ancient myths, stopping by the vast reservoirs where farmers once grew enough rice to feed an empire. Along the way, we met kings who called themselves God Kings, Apsara dancers, frozen mid-step in stone, and the slow, patient grip of tree roots reclaiming temples like Taprom. We even watched the empire's decline, when nature, war, and time joined forces. But here's the truth. Angkor never really disappeared. It simply changed shape, from empire to memory, from city to symbol. Its greatest legacy isn't just stone and brick. It's the lessons it leaves us today. That a city can be larger than medieval Paris, yet still fragile when it loses balance with nature. That culture can survive collapse. The Khmer language still spoken, Apsara dances still performed, temples still standing. And that memory is not written only by the victors, because even though Rome and China overshadowed Southeast Asia in history books, Angkor still commands our respect. Stand in Siem Reap today, and you'll see the strange duality. Angkor as both a tourist hotspot and a sacred space. Kids selling postcards outside temple gates. Monks in saffron robes chanting along the corridors. Travelers posing under the roots of Taprom like Lara Croft might step into frame. Angkor is Instagram famous, sure, but it's also a living doorway into a civilization that once fed millions. And that balance between sacred and spectacle is why Angkor never died. What it leaves us most of all is humility. Humility before stones stacked so perfectly they've held for 9 centuries. Humility before reservoirs so massive that modern engineers still marvel. Humility before time itself, the same force that turned an empire to ruins, but also made those ruins immortal. So as we close this series, remember, Angkor isn't just a destination. It's proof that humans can build wonders beyond imagination, but also that we can lose them if we forget the balance that sustains us. And more than anything, it's a reminder that forgotten civilizations never go completely silent. They whisper, waiting for someone to listen. And if one day you find yourself in the Cambodian jungle, hearing the wind rush through the trees, don't be so sure it's only leaves rustling. Maybe, just maybe, it's the echo of Angkor's festival drums, the spin of Apsara dancers, the footsteps of millions who once shook this ground. But here's the twist. Our journey doesn't end here. Imagine brushing the dust of Angkor's stones from your hands, and ahead lies another jungle, dense, mysterious, full of secrets. Not in Asia this time, but across the Pacific. There, the Maya built step pyramids that pierced the forest canopy and carved calendars so precise, NASA still nods in respect. There, the Inca raised a stone city in the clouds, Machu Picchu, without mortar, without steel, yet standing strong for centuries. If Angkor reminds us of balance with nature, the Maya and Inca bring even stranger questions. How could they predict eclipses with the naked eye? Why build cities in places where even llamas gasp for breath? And the biggest mystery of all, why did those dazzling cities vanish, leaving pyramids swallowed by moss and stairways lost in the mist? That's where we're headed next in Boring Becomes Fun. Deep into the jungles of Central America, high into the Andes, listening to civilizations that disappeared, but still speak through every stone. If you've ever wanted to know the secrets of the Maya calendar, or wondered why European conquerors feared and coveted Inca Cusco in equal measure, well, you know what to do. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and come along. Because the next journey won't just be fascinating, it'll make you question whether we truly know the limits of what humanity once achieved.